let's get into it. Today I want to talk about rational buyers versus emotional buyers. Now, I'm going to set up a problem that I had. Yeah, I have issues too. And then I'm going to show you how I got over this issue. We're going to talk about why rational buyers buy, why emotional buyers buy, but what happens when they simply don't and you can't figure it out. And at the end, the last slide I have for you, listen carefully. I'm not joking, I'm not exaggerating. I am going to give you a formula, a 3-part formula. And when you understand and know how to apply this formula, you will be able to sell both rational and emotional buyers. So again, hang in there with me because it's great content. And if you're watching this on a replay, forward all the way to the end. But I'm telling you, you're going to miss some great content if you do that. So anyway, let's get into it. First slide, here was my problem. As I mentioned, I was doing some presentations, right? And without going into a long story, one of the toughest challenges I had was from the stage, I can deliver a great presentation, right? Again, if you were at NSA, I can deliver a great presentation. I don't have a problem with that. But if you ask me to sell from the stage, back in the day, I was having problems. I couldn't figure it out. And I would read every book on persuasion, influence, psychology, behavioral economics, anything to understand how they did it. I would study all the masters who would sell from the stage, right? And I said, well, why am I not getting it? Why am I not able to sell effectively? Now, when I say effectively, in other words, why couldn't I get a high conversion rate, right? And I didn't understand that. And then eventually it went click, I got it, and that's what I want to share with you. If you want to sell from the stage, and by the way, this is not just for selling products or services from the stage. If you're doing a presentation to a group of people, right? Let's say you're doing a presentation, you're trying to sell your company's software, you can apply this as well, and I'll show you what I mean. Let me get into this was my problem. Always begin with setting up a good problem, right? All right, now, let's take a step back and understand how the brain works. Daniel Kahneman came up with this model, and I've always loved this model about the brain. Let me go full screen on you. If you've seen my presentations, you know where I'm going with this model. Now, let me see if my pen's working. Let me get on. Let's go with yellow. What the heck? Now, Daniel Kahneman says we have 2 systems of making decision. And he says the brain has 3 parts, right? There's the logical part, the rational part, there's the emotional part, and then there's this part of the brain down here called the amygdala. It's all about safety and survival, right? So, by the way, a good way to remember this is brainless. Get it? All right, good. All right, so again, this part's logic, this part's emotional, and this part is safety. And what Daniel Kahneman said, again, Nobel Prize winner in economics, said this. He called the logical part, this right here, system 2, and he called the emotional part and the survival piece, system 1. And he said, basically, we make our decisions based on system 1. We're more emotional than we care to admit, but many decisions are made at this level. Like, you ever have somebody explain something to you rationally? Like logically, and you still go, let me think about it. That's because this part of the brain is afraid. When we talk about safety, for example, we know the 3 states, right? Fight, flight, and freeze. So again, understanding the system, that there's 2 parts of the brains working here. There's a rational side, there's an emotional side. Our goal is to be able to speak to both of these and get them in line to make a buying decision. Hang in there with me, just wait. Now, let me clear this out. Now, what's interesting, here's what the brain does. According to Kahneman, he said, look, there's fast thinking and then there's slow thinking, right? So again, fast thinking is emotional, right? Some people just make decisions right away, just get into it, right? Then there's the slow thinkers. These are the rational folks, right? In other words, on this side, you have the emotional people. I feel it, I'm ready, sounds like a great plan, let's do it, right? Over here, you have rational. Let me think about it. Let's go through it. Wait a minute. Let's walk me through that. So again, these are the 2 parts of the brains you're selling to. Now, I know you know this already, but bear with me. This all has a point. In terms of language, when you're speaking to 2 parts of the brain, for example, if you're talking to a fast thinking, they're fast emotional, let's say instead of I blank, this is right, I feel this is right for you. That's the language to use when you're talking to the emotional brain. I know that certainty right there, or I think this is right for you. So in other words, when you look at language, and I think this is fascinating, when you look at language, if you study speakers, you'll begin to notice they use a lot of emotive words. Feel, I felt, I too have been in that position. They use a lot of empathy. When you're talking to this side of the brain, it's rational, right? You walk them through a sequence. Let me give you some more detail. For example, an emotional audience, let me clear this out. An emotional audience, I had dreamers. I've talked to solopreneurs. People are unhappy workers. When you're talking to people like this, they want to feel better. They're not feeling good about where they're at. Hit me with a 1 if you know what I'm talking about in the chat. You know what I mean? They're not feeling good about where they're at. I've been in rooms where there's a lot of dreamers, a lot of solopreneurs, people who just want to launch their own business, or people who haven't pulled the trigger yet. They're unhappy and they just want to quit their corporate gig, right? And what they want to hear, the language they want to hear, and again, one part of them wants to hear, they want to talk about, again, they want to hear about financial freedom. And we've all seen speakers talk to these emotional parts, right? How to design your life, how to make 7 figures, right? 6 isn't enough, apparently, right? How to quit your 9 to 5, pursue your passion, live your dream. This is the language of an emotional buyer. This is a language of an emotional buyer. Now let's look at the other side. The language of this buyer, a business buyer, is a little different. Over here, if you're talking to business people, corporate people, again, they want to talk about, okay, what's the plan? How are we going to execute this? What's the break-even point if I invest? What's the total cost? Like, how much is this going to cost me, Victor? And what's my return on investment? How much time and effort do I have to deploy? And are you going to give me support and training to make this happen? In other words, when you're talking to the emotional part, you're talking up here. You're almost like talking in the ether, right? It's all high level. There's no detail. It's very high level. And some people can make decisions based on that. I can't. I'm like on this side. For those of you who know me, I have an electrical engineering degree, so I'm very rational. I can't listen to emotional speakers. Yeah, I really have a hard time listening to rah-rah speakers like, you're the best, you're the greatest, you can overcome, you can do it. I'm like, I know, right? But no, you can achieve your goals. I know. You can be successful. I know. But in my brain, I'm going, how? How am I going to do that? Because my rational brain wants a roadmap, wants detail, wants information. My point here is you always, in any group, whether you're doing a general public presentation or whether you're presenting to business owners, right? Or whether you're presenting to an enterprise or corporation, you typically have a mix of people who are more emotional buyers and then some who are very rational buyers. Let's dig deeper. And again, I'm going to bring this all together and give you a simple formula to follow that you'll be able to develop a powerful presentation to accommodate both. So one of the things we have to do is customize the presentation for our audience. But here's the question you have to ask yourself. And I can't answer this question. It's like, what type of speaker are you? Let me ask you a question. What type of speaker are you? Would you consider yourself more of a aspirational speaker? Like, I'm not saying rah, aspirational, your big picture. Would you consider yourself an aspirational speaker? In other words, you'll talk about, if I can do it, anyone can do it. Here's how I did it. Let me show you how. It's your time to be successful. These are phrases aspirational speakers use. Or are you this type of speaker? In other words, are you more of a realistic speaker? Look, I'm going to tell you it's not going to happen overnight, right? This is stuff that you hear from realistic speakers. It takes time and commitment, and you got to put in the effort. And yes, you have to invest, all right? 2 different types of speakers. So my question to you is, which one are you? Now, you can argue that you're a blend, right? And I would agree with you. You're a blend of both of them, but there's always one dominant mode. That's the question you should ask yourself. To thy own self be true. What is your dominant mode? For me, I'm on the engineering side. My dominant mode is rational. When I do presentations, I think I do about maybe, 60, 70% easy on this side. My blend is like 70%, maybe 30. I dare say sometimes it's 80-20. I know who I am. I'm a more rational speaker, and then once in a while I'll tie in humor, stories, and things of that nature to kind of, appeal to the emotional aspect of my audience. So who are you? Next. And I want you to look at this because once you know who you are, here you are as a speaker here. That's you as a speaker. My question is, are you an emotional speaker or are you rational? Here's what's interesting. Now when you look at your audience here at the top, do you have an emotional audience? Do you have a rational audience? Now let me tell you, in case you're wondering, is that possible to have one versus the other? The answer is yes. If you've gone to some of these, I'll call them these inspirational, motivational seminars that are held publicly, right? Bunch of them. Won't mention any names, so I don't want anybody getting mad at me because I'm not saying they're bad, but they're very inspirational, very motivational, and very, you can live your dream type of presentations. And there you will find a lot of emotional buyers. Now, if you go to a corporate setting and you're going to listen to, let's say, different speakers on how the market is moving or shifting, now you're listening to rational, the audience is typically rational buyers. And then what they want is a rational presentation. They don't want any fluff. They want content, heavy content. And so I bring this up because once you know who you are, if you're, for example, an emotional speaker, well, you and an emotional audience are going to get along really well. Now, if you're an emotional speaker and you got a rational audience, you got to add more information. I'm pointing out the obvious. Again, if you're a rational speaker, well, rational audiences are going to love you. But here, you have to learn to add more aspirational content. And I see a lot of engineers, a lot of technology people who are in the tech space who are really good at talking about what the technology does, how they can use it, but they miss the aspirational piece in terms of where is this going to take you and how is this going to transform your business? Because everything is from A to B. You're here, you're trying to get to B here. A is where you're at, B is where you want to be. Any presentation is an A to B conversation. You're here, my job as a speaker, as a trainer, as a presenter, as a closer, is to tell you how to get from A to B. And I have to know how to create that presentation journey. In other words, how do I let you know that I can take you from here to here, and then my blend of content has to be informational and aspirational. And finding that right blend is the trick. And I'm going to give you the formula. I got 2 more slides to show you. Next, on this one, if you think about it, let me clear this out. What I want you to think about is, let's go to the corporate world for a second. In the corporate world, now look at it, let's be more specific. Here you are, you're a salesperson, right? You're a salesperson, you're talking to, let's say, a B2B client. Now, here's what's always interesting. When you're talking to this mix of people, it's very hard to tailor your message. So for example, if you're an emotional person, you might be able to resonate with HR, right? You'll probably be able to resonate also with marketing. But keep in mind that marketing is very rational in terms of how they want to spend their money. So that means you have to add some info when you're talking to marketing. In other words, some real tangible information. You can be a rational speaker, but when you're talking to a CEO, if you think about it, CEO is all about, it's not that they're not good with detail, but they love vision. They love to talk about market share, where it's going, where the company's going, how the corporate culture is changing. They're more aspirational. But if you're an irrational person and you're talking to engineers, you got it nailed. So now, all that is to say that you have to understand 2 things. You have to understand who you are as a speaker, right? What's your dominant mode? Are you more rational or more emotional? Once I understood this, I know that every time I speak to an audience, I have to adjust the blend. It's almost like adjusting a recipe. And if I sense that my audience is more emotional, I'll tend to create more aspirational content. And the opposite is true. So, what is the ultimate blend formula? Okay, how do you build a presentation that sells to both? That's really what we're trying to do here, is how do you build? This is what people always ask me. I said, Victor, when you're doing a presentation, it seems like the audience loves you. Great. How do you do it? And what I do is very simple. But again, it's a specific formula. Here is the ultimate blend formula. Here's how you build it. Let me walk you through it. Okay, it's a real simple formula, but you're gonna be able to hit the right and the left brain at the same time. So let's go through it. You want to build a presentation. You start out with the what. Again, imagine for a moment. Let me slow down. I get excited about this stuff. Let me slow down. You're going to do a presentation. You got to build something out, right? And what I typically want to do is I build what I call 5 to 7 minute modules. Let me write that down. 5 to 7 minute. These are modules. And a module is, it's almost like a complete story within 5 to 7 minutes. And in that 5 to 7 minutes, what I do is I tell you about something. Here's what company X is doing. Here's what company X is doing. So I'll talk about a certain company, right? Company ABC launched this new product, and all of a sudden over the last year, they've grown by 200%. Their revenues have doubled, they've expanded international, they've added this. So that's what, right? You tell the story. Then the next thing they want to know is this, is how did they do it? Now remember, you're listening from an audience standpoint. The speaker is saying, here's what this company's doing. Here's what this company's doing, right? And then here's how they did it. Here's what they did. They did 1, they did 2, they did 3, they did 4, they did 5, they did 6. These are the 6 things they did to become, to choose or do what they were doing. In other words, here's a company. They're growing crazy, right? The growth is exponential. How were they doing it? Here's 6 things they did to differentiate themselves in the market to capture more market share. The first one, they focused on international markets. Number 2, they found some white spaces, in other words, where there's little competitions in blue ocean, and they went after that market. Number 3, they added more salespeople to expand the feet on the street and be more personal with their customers, so forth and so on. Here's what they did. So here's what the company is, who they are. Here's how they did it. In other words, what the company did, here's how they did it, and then what you do is you close out with something like this. Now, here's how you're going to use this. In other words, here's how you're going to implement these strategies. 1, 2, 3. And then I talk about how they're going to implement the strategy. So let me do it slowly so I can wrap up here. I talk about a company, how they're doing. Because in your brain, it's great to hear what other companies are doing, how they're being successful, right? Other speakers are being successful. Other small businesses are being successful. You talk about that. And you talk about their growth and what they've done. The second part is, here's how they did it. Then you walk through, you analyze what they did. And once you know what they did, the third piece is, now here is how it applies to you. Here's how you can use these strategies. So again, this is the blend formula. If your story, your 5 to 7 minute module story, has these 3 elements, it will connect with both audiences. Because here's what's happening. If you think about it, what and how, if we would just look at this part right here, what and how is the aspirational piece. Here's what the company is, here's who they are, and here's what they did, right? And then the rational piece is this right here. Here's how you're going to use it. By the way, we can also argue there's some rational thought going on here, but this is what applies to you. What I love about this mindset is that if I talk about somebody or something, what's happening in the market, here's what they did, here's how you could use that and learn from that. Notice what I'm doing. On the emotional piece, I'm talking about companies that are growing and the success they had. We all love social proof. This is social proof. When we see other people doing what we want to do, right? The obvious question is, well, how are they doing it? So then the speaker, you talk about how they're doing it. And then when you turn around and say, well, here's how you can do it, here's what you need to do, and here's how you can implement this strategy so you can be successful, all of a sudden, you have this connection. Let's rewind this for a second. Let's say it's a B2B conversation. In the room, you have a CEO, you have a CIO, you have a CFO, and a CMO, right? You got all CXOs in there, right? Some are going to want to hear about other companies and what they're doing and how they're doing it. from a strategic standpoint, how are they doing it? That's what they're going to want to hear. And then let's say you're selling some software, and you're going to say, here's what this company's doing in this space, and here's how they did it. Here's what this company's doing in this space. Here's how they're doing it. The reason I'm here today is show you how you can use our software to have the same results, right? In other words, to have similar outcomes and similar results. So keep this in mind when you're doing a presentation. If you can really tie this blend formula together, and again, create what I call story modules. And by that I mean, if you have a 30-minute presentation, I'm going to have, for example, a 5 to 7 minute module, right? And if I do, I can tie and maybe give 4 different examples. So let's say they're all 7 minutes. 7 minutes, 7 minutes, 7 minutes, 7 minutes. Each of these 7-minute modules will contain the what, how they, how you structure in each one. And then I just bridge the stories together. You don't have to use 4, you don't have to use 3, you can use whatever you want, whatever you feel you need to do to kind of communicate. When I build my presentations, literally all my presentations are built using a modular system. Because if I could do a 5 to 7 minute module or presentation, and I can tell the what, the how they, and the you, and that thing is so crisp, so tight in the presentation, all I got to do is tie a bunch of those together, and all of a sudden I have a great narrative or great story. In fact, if you go to my Sales Velocity Academy, right? If you go to Sales Velocity Academy, what you'll see is there's something called sales presentation where I actually walk you through how to build a powerful presentation. It has some of this content, but it's more expanded on. In other words, I show you how to build the modules. And what I do when you're telling a story, whether it's a personal story from a stage or whether it's a product or service story, that you're going to use to sell your product or your service. Anyway, on that note, that is it for this presentation.